Okay, so as Dan said, my name is Bill Chestnut. I'm a cloud platform and API evangelist at 6Pivot. It's a small company based here in Brisbane, and we've got 3 people in Melbourne, 1 person in Adelaide, and the rest of the people are here in Brisbane. We typically work exclusively with like the ISVs, helping them get product to market around Azure, typically targeting getting their product up on Azure, things like that. So, and some of the examples I'll give you around API management, some of the stuff that I'm doing for 6Pivot. I was a BizTalk MVP to begin with, then I became a integration MVP, then I became an Azure MVP when they merged them all together. So, come on, you'll change slides here in a second. There we go. So the agenda for tonight is I'm going to talk about Azure API management, but kind of the focus is going to be how that helps you with a hybrid integration scenario. So how I can use API management to expose some of my resources that are either in the cloud somewhere else or on premises. So we'll look at that and just see, for me, API management fills some of the gaps that BizTalk used to fill on premises in the cloud. So basically what we're going to look at in API management is that the big key to API management is that reuse of service. You know how, I know when we did a lot of BizTalk projects early on, the whole idea was to be, BizTalk would be the focus of everybody that needed to consume data in the enterprise would go through BizTalk so that we could track who was using the data. We didn't have any kind of point-to-point integrations going on. Everything was going through BizTalk. So API management is really doing that a lot in Azure for us. It doesn't have the capabilities of BizTalk of actually deploying applications doing, but it has an ability to publish your APIs that you've already written. So if you've got APIs already in your environment that you're consuming from your web or your other applications, you can publish those out. And I'll show you why you want to publish those out. It's also got authentication and authorization built into it, so you can publish those APIs that maybe not as secure as you want. You can publish them out through API management and gain that level of security and authorization instead of having to go back and touch all the code. So nice feature to be able to do that with existing APIs. And the good thing about it, they're not limited to .NET. Any API you want to publish. At the moment, it doesn't support SOAP. It's REST only. They are working on SOAP support because everybody's been saying we want SOAP support. But it's REST at the moment. Also, there's a whole set of policies that we can do around caching, around URL rewrite, around payload manipulation, throttling. So how, in your current code base, if you had an API that you wanted to make public and you wanted public developers to hit, so like a Twitter API or a Facebook API, how would you control somebody just hammering that so they were making 2,000 calls a second? It'd be really hard in your code because you'd have to go in and implement a bunch of code. 2 lines of API management policy and I can tell them they can only call my API 5 times a minute. And any other calls they make to it, they get back a 429. So we'll have a look at that. Reporting. So that's another thing. If I want to monetize my API, I want to charge people to use my API, or I want to just see who's using my API and how often they're using my API. I've got a full reporting suite inside of API management, and also the policy engine will allow me to do things like send events to the event hub or notification hub. I can do that in a policy, so if I want to track all of that stuff via another mechanism, I can use the policies to basically capture the inbound data and the outbound data and do whatever I want to with it in the policy. We also have a developer portal. So when you build your API, how many of you build sample code for Objective-C, PHP, Ruby, all of those to go along with your API? How would you like to not have to build anything but have it there to use? We'll see in the API developer portal that at the bottom of my API, there's a tab. I can pick what language I want, and it shows me a sample code of how to call that API from that code. Because you'll get a question from an Objective-C developer on an iPhone, and you're going, no idea. But you go give them access to the developer portal, they can see all of that. And then continuous integration, continuous deployment, one of my favorite topics, but we'll see how I can do some of that with API management. So let's have the demo. This is a fairly heavy demoed version of the talk, so let me go out here to the Azure portal. We'll start in the new portal, but we're not going to stay there very long. API management is still in the old portal. As bad as I hate to say that, it is still in the old portal. So we're going to go to the old portal, and if we open that up, we'll see there is an API management section in the old portal. I've got a couple of those out there. I'm just going to walk through how you would create one because it can take a few minutes to create. I've already got one I'll use for the demos, so I'll just show you how to create one. So we do new, and we do a create, and basically we'll give it a URL, and I'll call it Brisbane demo, and I'll use one of my MSDN subscriptions, and it's available in both Australia East and Australia Southeast, so you can have it local. And then basically what we need to do is we need to give an organizational name, because it's got the developer portal's got a HTML front end that you can manipulate, and it'll show your organization name. And I'll just give this Brisbane demo, and my email. I'll use thistalkbill.com. And that was a fun endeavor I just did recently. I moved my website from .NET Nuke to WordPress. Conversion tool did about a quarter of it, and then I had to edit most everything else. Not fun. Now we're going to click Advanced Settings, and we'll see another page here. And this is where I pick the version or the SKU that I want to use. Developer version of API Management's about $45 a month. The standard edition's about $830, $850 a month. Premium is about $3,600. It is expensive, but in one example, we were dealing with a client that their competitor had just put out a mobile phone app. All of their systems were internal, running a very thick Windows client. They had no internet presence except a very simple web page that had no interaction with their back-end systems. And they needed to get this mobile phone app up and running quickly. So what we proposed to them and what they decided to go with is a premium edition of API Management. Premium edition of API Management can connect to an Azure VPN. They opened up a connection into their network through the VPN. So now the only way to get to that VPN for them is through API Management. So you get the security layer of API Management protecting those calls going into their back end inside of their firewall. And for them, it was a reasonable amount of money to achieve that without having to get all of their network guys involved in putting a bunch of firewall ports open and all that kind of stuff. So they opted for that. The premium edition, yes?
The standard and the developer editions don't cater for that?
At the moment, they do not cater for VPN. It is a request out on the user voice site. So if you search API Management user voice, it's one of the top ones out there. So go click the button and say that you want it. They are thinking about it because basically it's really hard to dev stuff in this environment without it. But the other advantage to premium is that you can auto scale across the region. You can put a premium unit of API Management in Melbourne, a premium unit in Sydney, and they share configuration. So you can also put two standards, but they won't share configuration. You just need to put something like Traffic Manager in front of them. The premium edition actually has Traffic Manager embedded. So it will automatically take you to the closest instance of the API management. No. So it takes care of all of that, and it shares the configuration across both nodes, or however many.
So what's the price on premium for that?
It's about $3,600 a month. And that's per unit, and you can have multiple units depending on, but I've looked at the amount of traffic that you can get per unit, and there's no way you're going to, unless you got a really, really heavy website, that you're ever going to get anywhere close to that. It's really the features that you want is you want the high availability across 2 nodes and the VPN support. That's the 2 reasons you go premium. So I'm going to pick just developer since I don't want to go through my MSDN subscription in an evening. There was a story there about an ex-boss at a company I used to work for, spun one up and left it for a week at premium. And so that's going to go ahead and create, but for the time being, what we're going to do is we're going to go look at the cloud integration training instance of API management that I have up. And they have a separate publisher portal. They don't do things in the actual portal. So what we do is we go down here at the bottom and we click Manage. And that takes us to the management dashboard. And the first thing I'm going to show you is how easy it is to get started. So what we have here is we have our APIs. By default, you get the Echo API. They deploy that for you so you can test API management. And basically, but what I want to show you is how I've got an API out there. It's setting in app services. It's got Swagger enabled on it. So I want to show you how easy it is to put that into API management. So what I'll do is I'll hit import. I've got a choice of either from the clipboard, from a file, or from a URL. I'm going to pick URL. I've got a choice of Waddle or Swagger. We're going to choose Swagger in this particular case. Then I have to go get the address, which I never remember. So it's going to be, it's my app services. And it's my conference API. This is some code that Daryl Miller wrote for the Build conference. It's a API to manage a conference. So it does sessions and speakers and days and slots and rooms. So, and it just happened to be an easy one to deploy out there, and it's got a lot of different operations. So what I do is I bring that up, and I go down here. It gives me the API definition as part of it, and that will point me to the Swagger. So I can grab that URL, go back to my API management, paste that in, and then I'm going to just give it a suffix, a conference. So I'm going to have cloud integration training.api-net is the address that I get in Azure. I can give it a custom domain if I want. And this is going to give it /conference and then the rest of the API. So inside of a company, I may have a dozen different APIs I want to expose, and I may give them each a different suffix. And then that way you won't have any conflicts with naming or anything like that. So I'll give it conference. And then basically later on we'll talk a little bit about product, and I'll save that. And that's going out there and reading that Swagger and creating the API management records that go along with that. So what we'll see in there now is we have a conference API. As you can see, we've got no activity on it. It'd be a little hard to have activity since I just loaded it. But we'll see that we've got a lot of different tabs here to look at. We can look at the settings. And that's basically some description and how we want to get to it and whether we want to expose HTTP and HTTPS. I've got this just set to HTTPS. Now we can look at the operations. So there's the different operations that we have, and there's several pages of those. So we've got the different operations. We've also got the security. And we're going to talk a bit more about security. So I can set it up to where it requires either OAuth 2 or Open Connect, and I can also set it where it does basic or client certificates. But we're going to show a little bit more about that when we get in there further. Also, I can look at if there's been any issues raised in the developer portal about this API. So if you're in a big organization and you put your API out there, you're going to have developers from your organization hitting it, and one of them might find a problem. They don't have to send you an email. They can actually put an issue in on the developer portal. And that also works if you open this up to the world to use your API. They can put requests and issues in on the... And so what we'll do, we'll go back to the operation real quick. And we'll go to get days. And basically you'll see that here's what the verb is, and the URL template, and the display name, and you can add whatever amount of description you'd like there. If you're going to open this up to the public or into other people in your enterprise, you might want a better description than nothing. So to tell them a little bit more about how to use this. You can also set some caching. So you can enable caching and vary it by the query string, and that's just out of the box caching in API management. And basically, you can look at the parameters, and you can add, and it'll also show you the response codes. So you can add the other response codes that might come back from your API. So that's pretty much what we want to do. We can also put our APIs in different products. And what we have here, they have two default products they set up. One is a starter product, and that means that I can call these APIs, but I only can call them 5 times in a minute. If I start trying to call them more than that, I'm going to get throttled. The unlimited one is basically I can do everything. What you might do is if you're in a business where you've got partners that are deploying your software, you might have a product that's partner, and that lets them have access to a different set of APIs than the public. They may have access to some of the admin setup APIs to build their own software on top of that, where you probably won't get the public to that. They'll just have the APIs to use it. And you can set up as many products as you want. And basically, you can go back to your API and go in here and add it to the products. And I can select both of those. And when people register for the developer portal, you'll give them access to products. So basically, you can give them access to what APIs you want to let them have and what policies that are around those APIs. So let's hop back to the slides. So that's basically getting started with API management. It doesn't take long to get your first API deployed in there. And you noticed it used the Swagger. So there's nothing .NET about that. You can have pretty much any API you want generate Swagger. So you don't have to, it's not just for .NET. And also you could even take the Salesforce API if you wanted to and expose it and control it. And then you might have in a back-end policy where it puts your Salesforce keys automatically injects those into the call so that none of your developers have to know that information. They just use the API through API management with their API key. Much easier than trying to manage that across a reasonable team of developers. So now we're going to talk a bit about authentication and authorization. So the first thing, if we're going to put something in the cloud, we want to make sure that it is secure, because that's going to be the biggest issue we have. So we're going to look at some of the identity stuff. We're going to look at client certificate support. We're going to look at some of the delegation support. OAuth 2. So how many different OAuth 2 servers do people know about? A lot. So Identity Server 3. The one client I'm at now is using Stormpath. What's another one that's readily available to you? OAuth 2 server. Azure Active Directory exposes itself as an OAuth 2 server. ADFS, I think, gives itself exposed as an OAuth 2 server. So And OpenID Connect, I hadn't heard of it. It's actually kind of version 2 of OAuth 2. It's a newer version of some of the OAuth stuff. They just renamed it, called it OpenID Connect. So let's go out and have a quick look at some of the stuff around the security. We'll go down into our security tab. And this is an interesting, I don't know why they put this here. Enable API management REST API. That's the first thing on the security tab. So if you want to be able to manage the API management through its REST API, you need to enable it here. And then you get a heap of stuff. And so these are all of the security tokens and ID tokens that it's generated for you to use the REST API. And the next one that you want to do is, I don't think I have to save that, is configuration repository. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but API management exposes itself as a Git repository. And you can do a pull and a push against it. We'll talk about that in the CI. Now, for your developer portal, you can register developers on your developer portal with any of those identity providers. So inside of your enterprise, you're probably not going to use Facebook, but it's there, it's available, depending on how you're doing it. So the first one's Azure Active Directory. So typically, if I'm working in Azure and I've got a bunch of developers, they'll be in my Azure Active Directory, so I can give them access through that. Google, Microsoft account, Twitter, and I can do just a username and password if I want. So I can, when I create a user, I can just create a username and password for them. And the developer portal's got a sign-up page, so you can set whether you need the developers to register or not and be approved. So typically, unless it's a public API, you probably want to have them register and then be approved to get access to the particular APIs you're working with. So you can also do client certificates. So typically what you would use the certificates for is from API management to your backend API, you would use certificates. So you'd use a client certificate authentication so that API management is the only person that can talk to your backend APIs. They may be on the Azure, but they require that client certificate to get to. So you can use that. This is where you upload those certificates. And delegation. Yes?
That would assume that your backend API is secured by a server-side authentication.
Client certificate, yes.
But if you simply want to use Azure API management to front a service that actually uses Twitter or Facebook or any of those other ones,
You don't have to put any authentication on it.
so that thing can
Yep.
forward to the
In the particular client I'm working with at the moment, what we did, they've got a storm path that creates a token for them. So we've got that set up. So when they make a call to API management, they pass that token, and then API management passes that token through to their back-end services who use that token. So it'll pass through that way. But no, you can open it up as however you want to. So in the delegation, basically you can delegate the sign-on. So if you've got a web page that's already logging on your developers to do other things, you can force the log on to your web page, and then you can call back to API management with the right information, and they'll be authenticated to your API management portal. There's a good talk. I saw it on Channel 9. Just recently, one of the guys did a talk on this, of how to set it up, and shows you all the code to do that. It's pretty simple. So this is one of those, if you already got a custom portal that your developers are working from, you don't want them to have to do another logon or go through your Microsoft accounts like I have 10 of them that I have to use and try to juggle. So you can do that. And then this is where we set the OAuth 2 up. So I would go in here and add a OAuth 2 server, and there's just a bunch of URLs and secrets and stuff that I need to set up in there. The neat thing about this is if I set it up and I go into the developer portal to test, it will automatically generate the OAuth 2 authentication and get the token and use it to test. So I don't have to, like if I had a token that I needed to test my REST APIs and I was using something like Postman or SoapUI, I'd have to go get that, copy it, put it in the header, run my tests. This actually does all that for me. So it's pretty neat. The OAuth 2, the Open Connect ID is pretty much the same approach. So basically you just go in there and add the provider. So that's pretty much the security stuff we want to look at. Again, they've made it very, very flexible. You pretty much can do it however you want to do it. Yes?
You have to deal with multiple issues of the tokens that are coming in. Can you set that up as well? So that, if you're running through 4 servers basically, that each
From what it looks like to me, you can have as many of them as you want set up. I haven't gone through and completed this one, but I'm almost positive as soon as I complete that one, it'll give me the ability to put another one in there.
and then it would decide on the issue of the tokens coming in, which one.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'll have to, if you drop me an email, I can test it on one of my clients and see. But yeah. Let's hop back to the slides. So now what we want to do is go on and talk about API management policies. So this is all the code that I would have had to written if I was just writing this in a .NET API app. So if I need to establish some throttling, if I need to do any kind of URL rewrite or anything like that, if I need to manipulate the data going through. One of the other neat features you can do in the policies is the developers for the phone app are ready to start work on the phone app, and they need to call your APIs. And your boss has come up and said, we need those APIs deployed so the phone app developers can get started yesterday. You're going to go, you can actually go into the policy and create the output. In the output section, they can call in, and you could either echo out the output or you could dummy up some output and send it back to them. So you can actually go in there with a policy and create what it's supposed to look like. So you can dummy up. It's not as easy as I would like it to be. I would love to be able to go in there and set up some parameter things and basically have it generate some code for that. But at the moment it's not, but it is possible to do. So you can mock up your API calls. And you can also decide how you want to handle errors. You may have an older API out there that is, shall we say, not real good about error handling. You might want to do some work in the API management policies to format that error a little bit better. I know there's an issue with BizTalk when you're calling through the REST, the web HTTP. If it starts throwing 404s, and 404 on a REST API might be fine. If the product's not there, 404 might mean it's not found. But when you throw that exception back to BizTalk, it just gets trapped. What you really want to do is maybe return a 200, but in the payload, return that 400 error so that they can then interrogate that and pass that back to their client. So you might want to do that in one of the policies. And I've seen a lot of that. I've been reading a lot of books on the REST right now about how you want to handle errors, whether you want to throw an exception. And also, if you throw an exception, it's going to be a generic. It might be a generic 500, which I don't know about everybody else, but it's about the most useless message you can have is it's a 500 error. Something broke. It would be much better if there's a little bit of information in there to tell me what broke. So let's go in and have a bit of a look at the API management policies. So if we go in here now, we've got a policy section. Now, we can do a lot of stuff on policies. So you'll notice that there's a default policy there, but I haven't selected any product. I haven't selected any API or any operation. So I can write a policy that covers everything in a product. And if I go here and select the starter product, there is a policy for the starter product. And it's a rate limit call 5, renewal period 60, also a quota call in 604. What's the number? Yeah, how many, don't have a clue how many minutes that is. Or actually seconds, whatever that is in seconds. But basically, for this product, I have now implemented a global policy that says for anything that's in that starter product, if I use the subscription keys, which I'll show you in a few minutes, for the starter product, I will only ever be able to call it 5 times in a minute. And I will get a 429 back for that 6th call in the minute. I have a whole list of policies out there. So allow cross-domain calls, so cores, if you've ever had to battle that about cross-domain. We've got authentication, we've got authentication client certificate, check HTTP headers. So if you've got if your API requires certain things in the header, you can check it in the inbound policy and stop it there instead of letting it hit your back-end API. Because that may be somebody just trying different APIs that they don't have access to. And then we've got control flow, convert JSON to XML, XML to JSON. That's a fairly handy one if you happen to have clients, a REST API that only speaks XML and you have clients that want JSON. So you can do that. There's the cores, there's find and replace strings in the body. So again, pretty much anything you want to do. Get a value from cache. You can insert a value in cache. So you can do very specific caching in the policies. Limit calls per day, per key or per subscription. Log to Event Hub. Mask the URL. Output trace information. So you can get additional trace how it calls. Restrict the caller's IP. Return response. Rewrite URL. Send a one-way request. Send a one-way. Send a one-way request. Send a request. Set back-end service. Do body. There's a bunch of stuff. There is out here on Microsoft on the API management product. There is a policy reference that will take you through all of those different policies. Yes?
So is there any limit on the number of policies you can
Nope.
What does it look like? Is it
So,
sync different XML files like this?
nope, it's right in here.
You merge them all together so that
Yep.
all syncs.
So, but what happens is that you can have a policy on the product. You can have a policy on a selected API. And you can have a policy on a selected operation. And that's what this button here is. View the effective policy for the scope. So it will pull in the policies from the product. It'll pull in the policies from the API and your particular operation and show you what that resulting set of policies is. Because the first thing you'll do is you'll try to set a different rate on a particular operation, but it may get caught by the rate that's on the product.
Does one override the other?
Let's try. Okay? So I'll go in here and I'll do my conference API.
Convert the JSON and convert it to XML.
Yeah. Do get days. And you'll notice that there isn't a policy for conference API get days. There is a policy for the starter product. So now if I add, I'll do add policy. And what I get is I get places to put code, put XML configuration. I can't call it code, it's XML configuration. So I've got inbound. And see, that's where it's calling off to the base. So if you want to do it before it goes to base or after, that's where you put it. Back end, if I want to control what gets sent to the back end. So if I want to do a URL rewrite, or if I want to manipulate the body before it goes to the back end. after base if I want to do that at a different spot, and then outbound. Do I want to manipulate what's come back from my call to the back-end service? If I did some sort of changing names on the way in, I might need to change them back on the way out so it looks like what they sent. So I've got that whole policy block to put in there. So what I typically would do is I can go in here and set the, also one other one to mention down there. You can validate the JWT token. So if your API requires a JWT token to be in the header when you make the call, you can actually validate it in here so that if it's an invalid token, it never makes it past API management.
Would your security adapter validate that token with something by the issue?
So basically, it needs to be set up in your API with keys and everything, and it knows how to get to that token provider.
Still have to add that policy there explicitly.
Yes.
It wouldn't do it at the security level.
It does some of the stuff already at the security level, but this is if you actually want to dig into the token and get some of the information out of the token. And let's see, let's go back into that one of the throttling. Where's my limit calls per key? So I'll do that on my inbound. You click on that and it copies the policy information into the policy. And if you really don't like editing in that little bitty window, which it would probably drive you nuts after a little while, you can pop it to a full screen editor. And then basically you need to go in there and you need to say, I want to make this 10 over a period of 60 seconds. And basically that's all you really need to do. You can save that. And then what we can do now is view the effective policy. So you see what happened? I put my policy in front of the base call. So yeah, I set it to 10 and then it resets it to 5. So being able to view the effective policy is a good one because you'll know what's getting pulled in from the higher level.
What is the base call? Is that a policy?
So basically what it is it's easier to show than explain. So basically if we go back here and exit full screen, so you've got a policy around the operation. The base call in that goes back to API, the API, which is conference API, and its base call goes back to product.
So it's always a parent, right?
Yes. So and that's why you've got 3 levels that people can write policies at. So you need that view effective policy, otherwise you're not going to have a clue what's going wrong when it doesn't work the way you want it to work. And then basically if I would go in there now and take and move it, run the effective policy, and I forgot to save it. So now you see my rate limit by key is after that rate limit. So it'll reset that base one because I put it after the base call. So basically it injects them in the order that it encounters them. So and again, I could have, if we look back and I go all operations, you'll notice there is no policy at the API level. There's a policy at that particular operation, and there's a policy at the product level, but there is no policy at that API level. And like I said, there's really good documentation out on the site for that. I've heard rumors that you can actually call Azure functions from inside of the policies. I haven't had a chance to try it, but that's got some very interesting implications to be able to call an Azure function. Yeah, so because that actually might even give you SOAP support, because you can do an Azure function and you can call a SOAP service.
You can use policies to do SOAP already.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're doing it.
Okay.
It's a pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
The rewrites will kill you, but yeah.
Yeah. I figured that there's bound, if there's a place where people can write code, there's a way they're going to make it work.
Yeah, it'd be good to see actual support.
Yeah, so again, there's a user voice out there. Go vote for the user voice out there about SOAP support. When we first mentioned to them about SOAP support, they went, "Why would you want that?" And we explained to them in some uncertain terms, but we had a bunch of things. Because I mean, one of the first things we used API management for at Mexio was we had a customer that had a BizTalk on premise exposing SOAP services, and they needed a mobile phone application. So basically, we set up, the SOAP services were old style SOAP services. We put BizTalk in the middle to basically call the SOAP services and return the rest, and then publish that through API management. So.
That's what the find replace string one looks like. Should be mixing over.
Okay, so let's do an add policy here and say we want to fix the output. And is it find and replace string body? Pretty much what you expect. Find blah, replace it with that. Could be dangerous.
And you're looking at perhaps hoping that you can call functions, because then you can potentially do something like regular expressions or
Yep.
do some logic
Yep.
saying
Yep.
if something, then something.
Yep.
Can you insert, when there's a rate limit happening, throttling happening, can you insert hints?
It automatically it does that for you. When we get to the little section about the developer portal, I'll show you what it returns. It actually tells you you've exceeded the rate and you need to wait so many seconds. So it's actually a fairly user-friendly rate limit message. So that's pretty much what I want to cover. I guess we could actually spend the whole topic on policies, because there's that much stuff you can do in policies. But basically, have a look at them, because this caching is really interesting, because you can do all kinds of stuff from there. Because you can insert objects into the cache and you can pull them back from the cache. You can do caching on however you want to do caching. So if the caching based on the variable that's calling is not good enough, you can implement it however you want to. Okay, so let's hop back to the slides real quick. So we had the demo there. Now we're going to go talk a little bit about the dashboard. We've also got analytics on the usage and the health of our services and the activity that's happening against them, sliced and diced by product, by API, by subscription. A lot of different ways we can slice and dice the analytics for this. And again, it's one of those good things where I can go look and see who's using my APIs, what they're using. I can also look at how long the back-end calls are taking and all of those kind of things. The problem is I probably haven't run enough stuff against we'll have to look at it and see, I probably haven't run enough stuff against this API to have good analytics on it. We'll look at the dashboard to start with. So basically, it just gives me some base analytics here. So number of calls, number of errors, bandwidth, and response time. And also about how many subscribers I have to each different product. I can also register applications. So if I've got app developers that are developing against my API, they can register their application in the portal so that we know whose applications are using our APIs. so we can notify them when we get ready to change something probably. So then we can go here to the analytics. Oh, I should have shown you back at the dashboard real quick that we do have the ability to look at today. So you can see my little spike a little while ago where I was playing with the Echo API. And then I can do yesterday, last 7 days, last 30 days, last 90 days. So if this was a production API, you'd expect to see a bit more data. One of the interesting discussions they had at the API days they had in Melbourne back in, I think it was March, was that you do need to monitor your APIs because people will find strange and unusual ways to use your APIs that you didn't expect. So you'll see one of the APIs that you expected to get hit once every month being hit 200 times a day. And you go, why? And you start looking at that. So in here, I've got the health and usage. So we can see, again, if I go to today, so we can see that there's where they ran it basically at 5:15 p.m. And then we can see that the administrator ran it, the product that was being used, the subscription that was being used, the API, and then down to the actual operation level. So you get a good idea of what the top operations are. You're probably going to get a good idea what they're going to be to start with. But basically it gives you a lot of that information breakdown in here to be able to look at the health. So then you've got separate details around usage. And again, you can tailor this by the region, by the product, by the API, by the particular operation. And I'm not sure why my calls are coming out of the US, but who knows? Huh? Nah. So if I do, it's pretty good because I don't have a US account at the moment, so it would be roaming on some, and I'm not plugged into the Microsoft network. I'm on a Telstra dongle. So I'm not sure exactly how that's doing that. No, so it also shows you the bandwidth that's being used. Then we can go health. So this is going to look at how much caching you're using and status codes and things like that that are being generated. Response time of your API. Service responses. Let's see if I can narrow that down a little bit better today. So 4 hits, 1 miss. That miss when I was playing earlier, I got a 429 when I did more than the number of calls. Let's see. Average is 451 milliseconds. Service response is 85 milliseconds. So, and then we've got the last one we've got there is activity. And again, that's products and subscriptions and APIs and operations, so you can see which ones are being hit. So if your developers are supposed to be using the API management to develop their stuff and you go out there and look and they're not hitting the APIs, they're probably not. So you can watch them develop things because they should be testing and hitting your APIs sitting out there. Again, you'd probably have a dev instance, a test instance, and a production instance of API management. So that's just a quick introduction to some of the analytics we can get out of that. Again, we've got all of those today, yesterday, 30 days, 90 days. Let's hop back to the slides. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the developer portal. And most of that stuff I've done already, except maybe some of the analytics and a little bit of the policy stuff. I really don't need API management for. It's nice to be able to put them into one place, but that's not going to give me a lot of benefit. Some of this stuff in the developer portal is going to give me some benefit, and we'll look at that. So we can look at all the different APIs, we can look at the products, we can actually post blog posts into the portal to tell the developers that we've made changes to something, we found a bug or something like that, and we fixed it. And we can also have them raise issues if they run into an issue around that. So let's go out there. And what we do is we go here, up here to the developer portal, and I'm going to open that in a new tab. Now our developers would go straight to that, and it's basically our cloud integration training.portal.azure-api.net. They can get to that directly. They could go in here. This took me in as already signed up, but if I wasn't, it would have a sign up button over here, and I can go in and put my email address and it'll ask me for a password. I can sign up, and then I can have it set to where somebody approves me, and then I'll get access to the APIs that I've been approved to have access to. So we can go in there and look, and we'll see that we've got the two APIs. We've got the conference API and the Echo API. We'll start with the Echo one just as a little demo. Here's all the operations. So I'll do the get. And basically it shows me what the parameters need to be. It shows me that I do need a API management subscription key. So that's what gets me into this, because otherwise it just rejects me. I can't use any of the APIs if I don't have that in the header. The portal automatically goes to my profile and pulls out my subscription key for this product API and puts it in my test calls for me. Saves me from having to do that. Now I can go, I'll show you across the bottom here. Let's see if I can, I'll make this a little bit bigger if I can. So I've got curl. If you want to do the API call that way, I've had to use that in anger a couple of times. But basically then I've got C#. So basically it gives me all of the code that I need to call that. I can basically copy that out. That's a console app basically. I can copy that out and put it into a project and run it. Java. So basically there's all the stuff I need to run that with Java. JavaScript, so if I want to put it embedded into a page. Objective-C. PHP. Python. And Ruby. Now, you might have thought, okay, this is the canned API that they've given me. They've done all this work that I'm not going to get all this advantage. So we'll go back now and we'll go to the APIs. I loaded the conference one up from scratch. It wasn't there. I can go to the get days, and guess what? I still have the same sample code. So it's generating all that sample code for me. So when the Objective-C developer comes up to me and wants to know how to call my API, I can give him a code sample to go do that. And also what I can do is I can do a try it. It automatically puts in my subscription key for me and basically shows me what the request is going to look like. I can send it, and there's my response. Now you'll notice up here I've got API Management Trace turned on. In the header that it returns me a URL. I had something besides Edge, it would format it right. Okay, hold on a second. Let me bring up something that'll be a little bit more JSON friendly. It's not much more JSON friendly. So there's always the last resort, which is how many people have got Microsoft Visual Studio Code installed? If you haven't installed it, go install it. Because basically I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to paste that in, and it's a text editor in the style of Visual Studio, but it's not COM. Yep. Okay. Select language. Yeah, no. I saw this earlier. I cheated before I did the... come on. I didn't have to. I think it's... No, it is format code. There it is. So basically, this is the trace of what happened when you called the API management. So you've got the API inspector coming in, checking the subscription key, and then basically going down through there, looking at the rate limit, forwarding the request, all the content type and everything it's passing along, and then the outbound. So you get that by just turning on that little flag in the this set to true. And I haven't tried it. I think it. I don't know. You'd have to try it and see. You probably wouldn't want it turned on externally, but you might if you're doing a call. So basically, I can go through there now and test all of my APIs I have published. So as a developer, it's really nice. I can go in there, I can run a test on it, and I can see what's going to happen. And when we had the Stormpath OAuth 2 server hooked up, had everything configured, it would generate the token for us and send it. So we didn't have to mess around with that token. It did that for us. So basically, we can go through all of those different APIs. If we go back to the Echo API, what I will show you here is that if I go to the retrieve resources and do try it, and then do a send, you'll see it took 1429 milliseconds. I'm going to go to the retrieve resources cached, do a try it. First one took 170 milliseconds. The next one took 13 milliseconds. And the only difference between those two APIs is in the definition of the API in the publisher portal, it's calling the same backend URL, but one of them has got caching turned on. So if we go back to the publisher portal, go into APIs, go into the Echo API, go into the operations, and basically look at the retrieve resources. We'll see it's calling /resource. If we go into the API. operations, retrieve resource cached. It's got cached on the end of it. It's got caching turned on here. And it's got a policy that's removing that -cache from the back end, doing a URL rewrite to get rid of the cached. So it calls the same API, but after the first time it caches that. So we'll go to policy. Echo API. Cached. Full screen. Huh? I don't know if I can do this or not. It's a touch screen. I get lucky. So basically, there's some information about the cache, and then the rewrite URL template. It's just doing resource instead of resource-cached. And then basically down here in the outbound is where it's actually writing it into cache and setting how long it lives. So there's a fair bit of stuff we can do with the policies. Because the thing is, if we had some people that were just populating drop-down lists and stuff on websites and stuff with these APIs, cache them. Because they're not, the stuff may not change that often. But now I've been able to do both of them by having 2 entries in API management and some caching set on one of them. So I can provide the normal API plus a -cached version of it without writing any more code. Okay, so let me hop back to the slides before I go too much further over. So now a little bit about continuous integration and continuous deployment. What they've done in the continuous integration deployment scenario is they've decided to expose the API management repository for all the configuration information, all of that stuff that we've set for policies and all of that kind of stuff. They've exposed that as a Git repository. So you go in, you configure it to expose it as a Git repository. You then do a pull down into your repository. You have all the configuration for your dev. You can go edit that and make it production. Open up the production Git repository and do a push. So that's the way they've decided to allow it. You could do it all through API calls, but you're going to miss something where you've got everything defined in that configuration. I haven't had a chance to play well with it. They've only had that up for about, I think, 3 months now. So if we go look, I'll show you how to turn that on. So if we go back to our exit full screen, go back to our security. It's the configure repository. And basically, you need to set up a username, and then basically it tells you how to deploy your changes and pull from the repository and set up all the credentials that you need for that. So something I'm going to be working on in the next couple of weeks because I want to do a continuous integration deployment with API management. So I'm going to have to get all that working, hopefully from something like Visual Studio Team Services Release Manager. So hopefully that goes pretty smooth on that. Again, the other thing I want to work out too is that when I deploy a new version of my API, when I go in here to my API, if I've got a new version, I can say import. I can give it my URL, my Swagger file, and then I can tell it an existing API, and it lets me pick it from a drop-down, and it will update that API. So that's what I need to do if I deploy a new code into there, and so I need to do that side of things. Okay, let me hop back to the slides. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how this affects your hybrid integration side of things. So typically, one of the reasons we go to the cloud is because either our users are in the cloud, our data's in the cloud, or our compute resources are in the cloud. One of those three things is the reason we go from our on-premise data centers. And if you think about the whole idea of bring your own device, a lot of companies don't let those devices on their local network, but they expose things through the internet that they can connect. Matt's a prime example. He's working in a place where he's going out through their VPN tunnel, even though he's sitting in the office, because he's got his laptop as opposed to one of their machines. So that's the approach they take on it. So we need to expose that information in our back end. So we've got a couple of choices. We can do things like we can cut firewall holes for every service that we want to expose in our network and drive our network engineers nuts about adding policy stuff to the F5s and things like that. Or we could do something like a VPN or an express route. I've noticed the VPN's really good for my home now because I've upgraded to the fiber to the node NBN. So my upload speed's a lot better. So my VPN into Azure works pretty good. So, and then what I can do is if I've got premium edition of API management, the only endpoint for that VPN will be the virtual network that's sitting behind API management. So I can't get into that VPN tunnel or that express route tunnel from anywhere else except inside of my API management. So that way I've added another layer of protection because they have to have an API management key in the header of that call to get through API management to anywhere. And then whatever security we decide to stack on top of that also. So it's a good way to secure those connections back into your network. I mean, otherwise you do have to do all the network management, and you might want to do one of the appliances in Azure. There's a bunch of reverse proxy and proxy server appliances you can now run in Azure that will provide you that firewall and that type of stuff in addition to what's already available in Azure. So depending on how paranoid you are.
API endpoints are though mapped to a URL, you can't reserve an IP. You can't still pop up and behind a cloud service or anything like that, can you? Well, I'm saying it's the firewall, it's a further firewall headache for us. If your firewalls or the security doesn't want to do URL,
you will get a static IP for your API management instance.
but not guaranteed to be kept. If you turn it off or whatever, it may...
You can't turn it off anyway. You have to delete it and recreate it.
But there's not a guarantee.
It will stay at the same IP address as long as it's running.
The same as some of the PaaS.
Yeah, there's a few of the PaaS services that will do the same thing. But no, if you need a really hard static IP address, you will end up spinning up a virtual machine, giving it a public IP address that's static, and doing a reverse proxy through it. That's the only way I figured out because I've got some customers that are dealing with banks and they need to whitelist IP addresses. And they didn't like the idea of the whole Azure data center as a whitelisted IP address range. So, so again, that's what you basically have to do is, but you won't really have API management. It's going to be an inbound address to Azure, and if it's on your virtual network, it's going to be an address you assign to the virtual network. So it's going to be a private IP address inside of the express route or a VPN.
Okay, I thought it was still going to be a public IP, but the express route reaches neatly at your endpoint in the data.
I think there was an announcement just recently that it's now a private. The back end of it's a private. I can confirm for you, but
I just thought that if you've got a URL that's something Azure, whatever it is, Azure-API.net, that was C-named to some cloud service.net.
no.
IP.
Cloud services are going away.
Wow. Oh yeah, but whatever the real IP address is in here, there's usually 2 or 3 C-name jumps
Yeah.
to whatever you get to whatever the real IP address is.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. But the thing is that you're calling into that. You're not going to have things calling out of it.
Oh no,
Yep. But again, you do have a policy that is a restrict IP.
Yeah, that's right. And the VPN, you talked about that as having a premium level. Is there a chance, have you ever seen anyone do a site-to-site VPN set up in their Azure subscription and be able to piggyback that through to it?
No, I haven't.
So,
No. Because you need, the reason it's premium is the only one that you have to configure a VNet first. Before you create the premium edition of API management, you need to create the VNet, and that VNet needs that, is what you need to end the VPN or the express route. So again, what API management offers you is that central view of all your services. So what BizTalk would have done for you on premise, where you hit all of your stuff is exposed that way. And basically, it's also a really easy way to combine those on-premises resources with cloud resources. Because if I have it exposed through API management and I decide that I need to move it from a BizTalk server running on-premise to a BizTalk server running in an Azure virtual machine, and I have it exposed through API management, nobody's going to know I moved it. I now have that facade layer there that lets me do anything I want to in the back end. They're against my APIs. So you do have to be a little bit careful. Don't expose things that you don't want people to use in the future. You might want to build just a bit of a shim that exposes it the way you want it to be in the future, and do the translation in API management to what you've got now, because you know that's not going to last much longer. So this is your opportunity to design your APIs the way they should have been designed, not the way they ended up being designed. So this is what it can offer you. And again, it's that way to transition. I have to get to the cloud today. I can do it through API management, exposing those APIs. Over the next 12 months, I'm moving all of my infrastructure from on-premises to the cloud. So, and again, my DR situation is much better. If I really have high availability requirements, I have a premium edition in Sydney and a premium edition in Melbourne. And when I go into a DR situation, I may change the VPN connection from the back of API management to a different data center. But none of my clients know the difference. They're still hitting API management the same way they were before I went into a DR situation. And again, it's also a good way to pre-process stuff. In your policies, do validation on the data. If the data is not the way you want it, reject it there before it goes to your on-premises systems or onto your back-end systems. Because the last thing you want to be doing is scaling up your back-end systems to handle bad data. That's a really good waste of resources. So, and again, we saw everybody picked up on that one policy thing, the XML to JSON, JSON to XML. That's a neat little piece there. Again, standardization on the authentication side of things. Consistent endpoints. So basically, you might have these projects that have developed APIs over a 5-year period, and they've got got a URL exposed in different places, and they all have a different one. And now you want to bring them all together under api.mycompany.net or .com. I can bring them all in. I don't have to do anything to those APIs. I need to publish them into API management, set up whatever policies I need. They're still living wherever they lived. But from the outside, it looks like it's one consistent URL. Because if you look at Salesforce and all of those companies, they have either a developer portal or they have an API portal where everything's at. So, and again, the other thing you can do is you can then start leveraging things like logic apps. So if you think about everything being exposed as an API, you call into a logic app, it goes out and finds some customer information. So you get a transaction into logic apps. So you can go look up the customer by calling your customer API. You find the customer information, and then you go check the product information with another API call. And then you come back, you get all that information together, and then you go call the API to insert the transaction. So basically, your logic app is really just orchestrating your APIs. Not a lot of code there, maybe a little bit of data transformation, maybe a bit of looping. So if I get a file in that's got 10 transactions in it, the API management or the logic app can loop through and do all 10 of those at one time, and then basically call my APIs. And the thing is that in the meantime, my website's using those same APIs, because the website, people can go enter a transaction. So why do I need 2 sets of code to do the same thing? If my website's using my APIs, my integration layer that I've exposed to my external customers that want to do different than my website, so they want to automate that integration, they can come through Logic Apps, Azure Functions, directly to my APIs. Because what you'll have is some different brands of different types of clients. You'll have some clients that don't mind going to your website and doing the work, but you'll have a bigger customer that says, oh, we've already got that captured in our system. We want to send it to your system. I've got APIs now that you can do that with. So, a little bit of a summary. As you can tell, I'm a very strong advocate of API management. I think it's a really good way to make your entry into that cloud, because it gives you a lot of those functions that allow you to fix up some, I would say, not so standard decisions you've made in the past, and get that stuff up there, have the visibility to look at what's happening with it, debug it, manage it, just like you need to be able to do with it. And basically, it's a really good way to start exposing your data to the world. And the better you make your API, or the easier you make your API to consume, especially if you're offering a public service, the more likely the developers are to use it. And if you've got all that sample code there for them, if I go out there and I want to run your API and I've got a block of sample code I can just paste into something and run it, and it works. That's a whole lot different than going out and starting with somebody's SDK documentation that's got a bunch of disparate samples that I have to put together. So, if nothing else, go out and give it a try. Have an API out there somewhere, go in, create a developer instance of API management, import it. Doesn't have to be your API, really. It can be anybody's, because basically all you're doing is calling through API management to it. So, any questions? There's some contact details for me, if you have any questions about that. And like I said, I'm going to try to organize either a Logic App Day exclusively, or a combination of a cloud integration day where it's API management, Logic Apps, and Azure Functions, to get people started on some of this stuff. And what I do on that, I've already run it the integration day in New Zealand once already for a company over there. So I basically sent them out you need to go configure these things in Azure before you come. And then basically, so you had your API management instance ready to go, so you didn't have to wait the 20 minutes for it to configure. And then basically we get started. We use those conference APIs so that you could publish something and test. And then basically we did some Azure Functions where we actually called off to some of those APIs. And then again, the Logic Apps, we consumed the APIs, and we also consumed the Azure Functions. So have a go at that. So. Anything else? Yes?
I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but I imagine API management also helps you if you wanted to monetize your
yes.
stuff by tracking.
So basically, there's a couple of different ways. I haven't played too much with the reporting, getting the reports in a automated format, but that data is there. I'm almost positive it's available through the REST APIs. So yeah, you could basically, the subscription, and you could tell how many times it was called in a certain amount of time. If you do just like a silver, gold, and platinum, you could do that with the throttling. So silver gets you this many calls a period, gold gets you this many calls a period, and platinum gets you this many calls a period. and you pay different amount of money a month for those. So, yeah, and that's if you want to be able to monetize your API. Or a lot of times it's also just being able to show people are really using it. So you start seeing the calls happening in it. You put it out there, and if you don't have something to look at to tell you how they're using it, you can go dig through the IIS logs and find some of that information, but it's a lot harder. So, anything else? Yes?
With the reporting side, you could see the analytics and message tracing. Is there capability for logging as well? So we can see metadata?
What they recommend with the logging is basically if you go in here to the policies, there is a policy around log to Event Hub. So that's what they're recommending there, because Event Hub is designed to handle squillions of requests. So much better place to put that logging information that you need to do. And again, let's go and configure policy. I don't have a anything to, let's go put this in the, actually, I'll put it in, yep. And I'm almost positive you could grab the whole payload if you wanted it. You've got, that's mostly the request type context information. Yes.
What about App Insights? App Insights would also help?
I haven't seen anybody hooking App Insights to this. The App Insights, you would be on your APIs. You'd put those on the API calls themselves, but you'd do something like the Event Hub to do the logging you want to do at this level. So, yep. So they've pretty much covered a lot of things. How many of you are Microsoft partners? A few of you? Yep. If you're doing a lot with this, you need to find out, you need to contact your local Microsoft person and see if you can get onto the Azure Insiders. Because that's where these guys from API Management and Logic Apps and things like that hang out answering questions. So it's a really easy way to get into them. So basically, I know the lead program manager from the API Management team fairly well, because doing a bunch of stuff with them. The product was called API Epiphany that Microsoft bought. And one of the guys is still at Microsoft that came from that company, one of the main. And Evgeny left, Vladimir is still there. So, and he's still very involved in the API management side of things. Again, user voice, API management, and go look at the different user voice things people have put in and vote. So if you're interested in that the VPN at the developer levels and stuff like that, go vote for those. The SOAP one's out there too if you want to make SOAP a first-class citizen instead of a lot of policy work. So.
You basically have to take the payload out as it comes in, the values you want, and then you completely strip out the entire content, rewrite the URL, and going out the other end, you build the fresh payload the other end, eject the values in, and then you reverse code it the other way.
Yep.
So you're completely replacing the payload, changing the headers, the whole thing's manual.
Yep.
You can't just suck in a WSDL. You're basically going to know what the so-called looks like, what it's going to look like at one end, what the rest look like at the other end, what the responses should look like, and completely reverse engineer it.
So.
In the actual policies, it's basically Razor. So you've got a mix of XML and .NET, but it's very limited .NET.
Yeah.
You can't do, in particular, like half the libraries are missing, but you
Yep.
pretty basic stuff, and it's really quick.
Yep. So that's the one thing I want to play with next is seeing if I can call an Azure function out of the policy. And then you could do some of that in real code.
Well, and being able to call those little API apps, I'd like to use, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
You know, they've got that in test at the moment.
Yep. Yep. So
Because you get to certain things, you're like, yeah, this function's only available in full .NET, and you want to do it in there, you have to actually put in the code into the policy itself.
yeah.
It's normally available in .NET, which is just frustrating.
Yep. Yep.
And you copy the policies all over the place, you want them in one spot.
Yep.
It is kind of ugly.
Yeah. So again, hopefully they'll take on board the support for the SOAP and make it a first-class citizen, and that'll make everybody's life so much easier. So, and again, they're very responsive. I think they've done a lot in terms of it. Because I ran into a thing with the load balancer up front, is because if you give it a custom domain name, it no longer responded to the default name, like the cloud integration training dot API. Was it API dot or was it Azure dot API dot net? It didn't respond to that URL. And what we were trying to do is have a standard edition in Sydney and a standard edition in Melbourne and put the load balancer in front of it. But we wanted the load balancer to go through API management to our back end to verify that service was up and running. But we couldn't get API management to do it. And I spent a Saturday morning on the phone with the guys from the States of them explaining to me why it wasn't working. Once they understood what I was trying to do, they figured out why. There is a URL. There is a URL that you can hit that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that will tell you whether the instance of API management is up and running. So you can hit that as the health check from the load balancer, but you can't get past API management. So you can put two standards behind load balancer and see that they're both up, but you can't see that any of the services that are past there are up. Thank you very much.